That's the path to the dark side.
Semantics.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Acolyte episode 6 entitled Teach/Corrupt. I'm David Chen. Joining me today for this conversation, he is the co-host of the amazing Spider Talk podcast. You've also heard him here frequently on the Decoding TV show. Dan Gvozden, welcome back to Decoding TV.
It's been a little bit, but I'm always eager when I get that call to be your Padawan for the week. And I don't know how you feel about that title, but here I am to hopefully lean some insight into Star Wars as I am wont to do every now and again.
Awesome. You're the Jecki to my Yord. And likely both of us will share the same fate as those characters in this show. Anyway, we are going to dive into episode 6. We're going to talk about our overall thoughts and some of the specific stuff that happened in this episode. Before we do any of that, though, Dan Gvozden, this is your first time talking about the Acolyte on Decoding TV. We're probably going to have you on again to cover the finale of the show. But tell us a little bit about what you think of the show so far.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the internet like on fire over this, and I know you guys have talked about the kind of like strained reaction to the Acolyte. I was really looking forward to the show. I had heard a lot about it, early on, that it was something to look forward to. It was going to be, I guess, similar enough to Andor, kind of like playing down the heavy use of the volume, at least what I was told, and that it was going to be representing a kind of bold new direction for Star Wars in a different era. And I think that's really exciting. I, like many people, are very eager to get away from the Skywalker saga. And, I think when we went to The Force Awakens, it was a really like big opportunity for Disney, the new owners of this franchise, to do something very distinct and different with Star Wars and like say, we're going to come back after 30 years away from these characters. How has the world changed? And I'm no fan of The Force Awakens. I think it played it very safe. And so Disney was getting another opportunity here by going to the High Republic. And I know this isn't the first High Republic story told in the Star Wars universe. There's comics and books, but it was my first exposure to it. And so I was really excited to see like, okay, blank slate, ostensibly, like what kind of like bold new era are you going to enter us into? And that was kind of like the big exciting appeal to me. And I think there's a little bit of that. Frankly, I would have liked a lot more. I've been hurt one too many times by Star Wars to really get so upset about this. This is no Rise of Skywalker. It has, I think, a little bit more of a reason to exist than Obi-Wan, and I don't think it's as bafflingly plotted as Boba Fett, which was like a follow up on a character that completely abandoned everything you liked about that character. And so like, I'm kind of going into this and I've been remained like fairly intrigued throughout about where it's going, if not increasingly frustrated that it refuses to go where it seemingly wants to go with this series. I am really exhausted by the mystery box format of this show and of Disney Star Wars in general. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm like waiting for the fireworks factory to show up on the show. I thought the episode 5 was going to be it, and they took some bold choices in episode 5 by killing off a bunch of cast members. And so that was exciting. And then I feel like with this episode, we're kind of back in a holding pattern.
Honestly, I'm just going to say it's hard for me to talk about this episode because it feels like nothing. Like it feels like a nothing episode. Like so little happens in this episode that it's hard to even summarize. We'll try to talk about some of the stuff that happens, but like this is definitely an episode that is people hanging out until actual stuff happens.
And catching the audience up on stuff we already know. Like
that's one of the biggest issues I have with the Acolyte is so many scenes in this show are characters telling each other things the audience already know. They're like the completely unnecessary scenes of characters explaining to other characters what we already knew. I'll just give you one example from this episode. Mog, the character on Coruscant, like the Jedi on Coruscant, telling Vernestra, "Oh, hey, like Soul was on," like he explains literally the scene we just watched of like, I was talking to Soul and then the holo communicator went out and now I don't know what's going on. It's like we literally just saw that. We don't need to see another character explaining that to someone else. And this happens so often on the show, just characters explaining to other characters things we already knew. I understand you need to show that the information is passed on, but other shows have a more elegant way of doing it than literally just the character is saying it.
Well, the way other shows do it is they wrap it up in character, right? And like what emotionally it feels like to learn that new detail for that particular character. And so many of these characters, whether it's, they're lacking emotions because they're Jedi, which like, frankly, I'm tired of that trope. Like it's almost like leaning into the faults of George Lucas as a director and making that just a like understood part of this world. But like nobody reacts to anything. There's a scene in this episode where a Jedi comes upon all of their colleagues who have been slaughtered and has no reaction and just blandly reads off the evidence that they see in the scene of what happened. There's a scene in this too, which I laughed out loud at, where one of the Jedis comments to, who he thinks is Osha, but is actually May, about how she treats her droid. You can love this thing even though it's a robot and it doesn't have any emotions. And it's like, is that meant to be a metaphor for the Jedi? Because like these people do not emote. They have no reaction to anything.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. I guess for them, they think it's a feature, not a bug, Dan. But
Sure.
From a dramatic standpoint, I think we're starting to see some of the limits of that. All that said, there's one last thing I wanted to mention. First of all, I actually really liked the action from last episode. I don't know if
Yes.
you enjoyed it, right? Like, I think when I talked with Patrick about it, it's like we love the action, the character stuff, not as good, right? That was our reaction. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I actually think the action in this show is like fantastic.
Yes.
It's like suddenly the B team gets to direct a scene and it comes to life. I think you could even see this in the prequels in the way that's like, oh, clearly like previs and special effects and the choreographers took over now, and suddenly this whole show has come to life.
The B team? What do you mean by that?
Well,
The B team?
oftentimes action is shot by other people,
Right. It's
than
usually
the
shot by
lead
like
director.
a second unit director or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, that's what I mean to say. I don't know that that's the fact here, but that it suddenly becomes so much more alive in terms of how it uses the camera, how it stages the scene. Everything in between is shot, reverse shot.
Right.
There's no like grandeur or like unique visual idea, which is something that Star Wars is like almost entirely like exists on top of. And so like so much of this to me feels like I'm on a Disney theme park ride, where it's like you can look but don't touch, and the camera kind of has that approach too, where it's like I don't know
I
if
don't know.
I'm being too harsh.
I would dispute the idea that like the original trilogy, let's say, was like super interesting in terms of cinematic choices. Like the shot composition was very interesting and very beautiful, but like Patrick Willems, for instance, did a whole like visual analysis of all the like original trilogy, and it's like most of them are shot at like the same focal length or a similar focal
Fair
length,
enough.
and like so I don't know that this is visually worse than in the non-action scenes than any other Star Wars movie. But I would agree with you that the show, The Acolyte, really comes alive during the action scenes.
Every second of the show, it feels like everyone is working their hardest to make a great Star Wars. Like I don't doubt that for a second. Like environments are like lush, costumes are designed within an inch of their life. It's like everybody is giving it their 100%. It just feels a little like, to me, maybe overly reverent of Star Wars, whereas like I watch something like Andor and Tony Gilroy, who is a self-professed not a fan of Star Wars, like there's something a little bit riskier there that in a way brings life to this that all these other shows I don't think have really yet to capture. there's some intangible thing I feel like I can't really grasp, and maybe me blaming it on X, Y, and Z is not ever really getting there, but like I feel it. It feels hollow in some way.
I wanted to mention Cortosis, which is a metal that is found in the Star Wars universe that is known for its extreme energy absorption capacity. And this is something that the master fighting in last week's episode used a lot. Like he was able to short out lightsabers using this, and it's what he's using in his helmet and I think body armor or something like that is Cortosis. That is explicitly mentioned in this episode. So just wanted to call that out because we talked about it, but we didn't ever say Cortosis. And I think people had questions about like, how did he make the lightsabers go out? And it's like, the answer is Cortosis, which is an in-universe explanation for this kind of thing. All right.
It's always nice when there's some kind of like check on the Jedi. I remember in the expanded universe, there were these, I think they were called like the Miri or something, were these like yellow space slugs that repelled the Force. And, maybe it reduces Force away from the sort of like religious, mysticism of it all by giving it hard rules. But, it allows for fun things to happen other than just people pushing each other away or swinging a blade.
Totally. All right. So in this episode, there's basically 3 plot lines that kind of converge. There's Osha and Qimir on this unknown planet. There is Sol and May on the ship. And then there is Vernestra and Mog on Coruscant, and they eventually travel to Kofar. So Osha wakes up in Chimir's lair. She's on some kind of water island on an unknown planet. At first, I thought it was going to be the planet that Luke was on from Last Jedi, because like it looked like structurally very similar, but I don't think that's what they're going for.
I feel like we're meant to at least begin to think that. Am I wrong? Like, I mean, it's so similar. Like I had the same exact
island,
thought.
Yeah, the island structure, like physical look of the island looks kind of similar, but yeah, who knows?
If it's not it's at least meant to like evoke the idea of like remote Jedi training ground in the same way that Luke had on that planet.
Yeah, Octo is the name of the planet, by the way, in The Last Jedi. But anyway, so what happens with Qimir and Osha? Qimir goes to bathe, takes all his clothes off. I gotta say, really disappointed we didn't get some Manny Jacinto ass in this episode. Would have.
I want Star Wars nudity. We got the F word in Andor, and now I want full frontal. Like,
I don't think we got the F word. I don't think we got the F word.
I'm pretty sure we did. It's like, but it's like kind of half muted.
We got the S word. We got the S word, and they were gonna put the F word in, and then I don't think they put it in.
Maybe I'm mixing up my stories
because there is the S word. Okay, but then there is a scene in Andor where one of the characters is supposed to say "F the Empire," and instead they didn't use the F word. They decided not to.
I felt like I saw someone slow it down, and it's still in there, but maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe because they probably dubbed it over.
Maybe.
It was replaced in post with something else. Anyway, but I agree. Like in Star Wars, there's no nudity, there's no sex. It's all very chaste, and I thought some Manny Jacinto ass might get us into some more exciting territory.
Whatever does it for you, David. Yeah.
Sadly, it was not to be. I mean, that is a good-looking man in the show, I have to say. Like he has hashtag arm goals.
Well, I mean, it's like he has such armed goals that like his Sith outfit has arms cut out of it.
Yeah. The Sith outfit could not contain his arms, right?
He's in a robe, but his arms are free to enjoy themselves. So,
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, he explains to Osha that he didn't kill Sol or May, and then the rest of the episode is basically the two of them hanging and chatting, talking about like what his deal is. There's some cool quotes actually. So I'm just reading here from stuff I wrote down. The Jedi teach there's only one way to access the Force, and if you don't do it their way, it fades. But there is another way. Below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions: anger, fear, loss, desire. And then she says, "That's the path to the dark side," and he says, "Semantics," and which end quote. Which I thought that was like that's a cool idea of like it's all the same thing. It's kind of a different way of describing the dark side that I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I feel like the words on the page are kind of interesting. I just feel like the way that it's delivered is like people talking about like the Wikipedia entry or like an
Uh huh.
IMDb quotes page. And not to knock the actors, but like I remember when like the mantras of the Jedi or Sith really carried like like power, and here it's just rattling off, like fear leads to hate leads to anger, whatever. I felt like it was very like flatly
hmm
delivered for someone that's really trying to convince someone of like this true emotionally driving force that's pulling them forward. I mean,
They're talking about it like they're talking about like what's available for lunch in the cafeteria today, basically, right? Like
yeah, or
instead of
or
like
like
this is literally the most important topic of my life is kind of what you're right.
yeah, but it's also I feel like it's like kind of part of the whole like superheroification of Star Wars, which is like the Force is not really a like religiously inspired thing. It's just a bunch of powers that you can tap into and be a villain or a hero. And maybe there's some gray ground in between, but I feel like it's kind of lost like all of its grandeur, and maybe that's like part of the
Yeah.
function.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably part of it. It's probably to let the air out of that balloon a little bit. So, but that said, I take your critique about the performance. Um,
I just want them to go somewhere with it. Like if it's to let the air out of the balloon, what are you replacing it with? Like, and I feel like this whole franchise has been dancing around this thing, the Last Jedi getting into it the most, but like no one really wants to get into like the real like, ickiness of like the Force in any kind of detail, and we always revert back to the norm. I mean, even here the episode is like a flip. Everybody they flip costumes, and we're seemingly flipping allegiances. As Qimir seems to be going evil. And we've got the Sith guy that's I think we're meant to be. You're attracted to him, but I mean, I think we're also supposed to be attracted to his like the words he's saying and how like convincing that is. But I don't really know that I was, you know,
you
I'm
were not
seeing anything
seduced by
new.
his pitch.
Yes, I
Yeah,
mean, I
I
would like to have seen him bear from behind as well, but
I
yeah.
I can't believe you're like making me defend the show. It's really putting me in a tough spot, Dan. But I mean, this is the time period of Star Wars where the Jedi rule, and it's a time of peace and prosperity. And by the time it's like what 100 years between this and Phantom Menace. So by the time we get to Phantom Menace, like the Jedi have already started to decline. And I think we're meant to see like, oh, this is maybe these events start to kind of rattle, the world, the order as it's called in the show. So
I think that's 100% right.
right, what is you're asking? What is it replaced with? It's like, oh, like the chaos that comes, in the first 6 episodes of Star Wars.
I
Um,
guess I just feel like this territory has already been mined by the prequels, and I
mhm,
think like if whatever critiques you
right,
have of the prequels, I think it nails this idea pretty solidly, which is like the Jedi make a big mistake
yeah,
and it ends up costing them in the form of Anakin Skywalker. And here we're kind of being told the same thing. Like I didn't want to repress my emotions. I could be a more full me, but the Jedi wouldn't allow me to. And I'm kind of hoping for like
right,
I thought
yeah,
we would get something maybe more distinct and new, like maybe even a perspective that really frames the Jedi as bad space cops. But I still think we're meant to be somewhat sympathetic to them, even if we recognize their flaws from the prequels. Like I just think there's a more bold like statement, especially if it's going to birth the Sith. Like it should be something that like we feel at the core of the show is like, oh, I get it. I really get why the Sith exist in a new way than what I already understood before from the prequel series.
yeah. That's
Um,
that's fair. I think the show is delivering some of that, but I understand if it's not sufficient. And certainly with only 2 episodes left, I don't know how much territory they are going to cover.
I mean, I think we're going to get there. Like, there's something about in this episode, the power of two,
Right.
and like how that comes to be. And like, there's something with Qimir that we've been told we need to know for 6 episodes now, you know? So like
Well,
maybe that will, yeah.
Yeah, so we learned that Qimir says, "Hey, like, don't you feel bad about the fact that the Jedi kind of threw you away, threw you Osha away? Like, you trained with them, and then they threw you away, and doesn't that make you feel bad?" He also reveals that he himself was thrown away, right? So, like, he also trained to be a Jedi and was likely rejected. So, like, we learned that about him, and maybe we're gonna learn what his connection with some of the other Jedi on the show are. Uh, but he reveals that he wants, like, what he wants: the power of two, right? This is something that a lot of people have been speculating, which is that there is a Force dyad on the show, right? I'm going to read here from Wikipedia. A Force dyad, also known as dyad in the Force, was when two Force-sensitive beings had a unique Force bond that was unbreakable, that made them one in the Force. The power of a dyad was as strong as life itself, with the individuals forming the dyad sharing a connection that spanned across time and space. Members of the dyad were attuned to each other's senses completely, including what they saw, heard, and felt. They possessed unique Force powers, such as the ability to physically interact across many light years in the galaxy. End quote. So that's a little bit of information about the Force dyad. A lot of people have been speculating that Osha and May are a Force dyad. And so when Qimir says he wants the power of two, maybe he wants control over this Force dyad. Maybe he sees himself as part of a Force dyad. Still unclear, but I think the Osha May Force dyad is like the most likely explanation there.
I think
And
that's entirely possible. It seems like a lot of lifting to do with 2 episodes to explain
yeah,
what you just explained in 30 seconds. But I guess my read on it, without getting into the dyad thing, was like the whole like pre-established rule, in the Star Wars universe, that with the Sith, there's always two: the master and the apprentice.
hmm
As established by the Lucas, and Skywalker saga of movies. And so, like, my thought was, whatever reason why, maybe it is the Force dyad thing. Like, this is the birth of that system, as we see it play out in the future films.
So that's basically what happens with Qimir and Osha. There is a scene where Osha puts on Chimir's helmet and like learns it's a sensory deprivation helmet. And that's kind of a cool moment, like she puts it on and I don't think we've ever seen, or we rarely see from the inside of what those helmets are. And
Yeah.
it's not very exciting, but it's like cool. And it's a cool way to end the episode with her breathing and stuff like that in the audio. And so I thought that was a neat little touch, but
I've always found the transition to credits at the end of each of these episodes really awkward. A lot of the times they're not like, I feel like they're not really like strong cliffhangers, or like maybe it's just the circular, like, matting inward, that like I
mhm.
find not quite a hard cut enough to
Right.
like
Yeah, yeah,
land
yeah.
that final beat. But I thought this one actually worked. I
Yeah.
found it like not only visually, exciting for its lack of anything,
Right.
but also the kind of like, obviously the allusion to Darth Vader with the heavy breathing. That stuff was interesting, and an evocative image to close out an episode that I thought otherwise, had some, nice, environmental stuff, but not as, much action, which is typically provided the visual dynamism of the show in previous episodes.
Let's talk about what happens on the ship. So, if you'll recall, Sol left the planet with May, who he thinks is Osha, right? And Sol, they're on the ship. He's communicating with Coruscant. He's like, it's time for him to face the High Council to tell them everything that's been going on. The ship's power suddenly goes in the fritz, and then Pip and Basil realize that May is May, like she's not Osha, and they try to annoy her a little bit. May then resets Pip to factory settings, which is really violent, and then uses Pip to run a check on the power system. And so then May and Sol have a conversation, and Sol says like, he's really hard on himself. He's like, how could I not have sensed that Qimir was Qimir? He says to May, who he maybe does or does not know is May at that moment. And May says, I think when you really want something, it can cloud your mind. He fooled us all. And so anyway, at that point, May says, like, you can tell me what happened on Brendok now, Soul. Tell me everything. And then literally as he's about to say, like, I'm very irritated at the show for like literally Soul has said, like, I'm gonna tell you everything right now. And then like and then before he can say it, he like something interrupts them that prevents him from saying it. So that happens. I think I can count it, but like I think it's no fewer than 5 times in the course of the last like 2 to 3 episodes, right?
I was going to say it happens at least 3 times in this episode.
Right, where he's like, okay, I'm going to tell, and then the power comes back on, and then at the very end, he's like, all right, it's time to tell you, and then cut to the end of the show. Like, it's just like, I don't know if they're doing it comically to troll us, but like, it is...
No.
It is very, very annoying, and it's so clear to me that they are stretching out this reveal to the breaking point, to the point where it's like it just makes absolutely no sense that he wouldn't have said something by this point.
Yeah.
So that's really frustrating.
I mean, like I don't know how you guys felt about the Qimir reveal, but like I found that really disappointing. Because it's like, okay, it's this guy.
It was the least interesting reveal that they could have had. Like, we ran through some other possibilities on the podcast. Like, what if it was Mother Coral? Like that would have been like an interesting. Oh, okay. Like you can see why she would want to kill all the Jedi. But
right.
It's this guy we barely know anything about. So it's like, okay, I guess. I mean,
right.
Manny Jacinto makes it work.
That's their that's their track record on reveals. And so like they're building this whole show on like, you got to hang around for the reveal. And it's like, do I do I trust you that this is going to be worth it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still on board, but it is frustrating because it's like, just say it,
well, anyway,
the show needs to end with him getting killed right as he's saying it, so anyway.
He's like, May, the thing that happened on Brendok was lightsaber through the chest, and then you don't hear what he has to say.
Yeah.
But anyway, Soul knocks May out and he knows it's her. He's like, hey, May, he knows it's her. It is unclear how Soul realized that it was May. Like, it is heavily implied that Basil told him, the little tracking creature, right? Because we see him right behind Soul right after that. You know what I'm saying?
Did you find it impossible to follow whatever Basil is doing in this show? Like, it's like, if you have this information, like at first I thought he was like trying to sniff out, follow his nose and identify that, the smell is different between May and Osha. It's someone in disguise, but that doesn't really seem super clear. And then there's like this pratfall sequence.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just like, get to it. Why is he sneaking around the ship? It's his ship, like that he's a crew member on. Like, I'm just like, what is this plot line? I'm like,
the thing that is really irritating, not irritating, but kind of, irritating. I'm going to say irritating is there's been a lot of chatter online, Dan Gvozden, about how would Soul not realize that that's actually May? How would Soul not recognize it right away? Because doesn't Soul have Jedi Force powers? And I think a lot of people have been quoting or showing like, hey, I don't know if you went back and watched the prequels, but there's like tons of scenes when Palpatine is sitting among the Jedi and they don't realize that it's Palpatine, right?
I mean, it's made explicit, right? Yoda says like, the dark side of the Force as a way of clouding the minds of, of Jedi. So it's
I am not
perfect.
bothered by that at all.
No,
I'm not bothered by that at all. What I am bothered by is Soul doesn't seem to recognize that Osha has become a completely different person with a different personality.
Yes, yeah.
Like you don't need the Force. You don't need the Force to do that. You just need to be like a regular person with regular people skills, which you could argue that Soul doesn't have. But like, it's really tough for the audience to be ahead of the characters. And in this case, it's like, that's clearly May. It's clearly not Osha anymore because Osha looks and sounds different, even though it's played by the same actor and they're twins, right? Like they're completely different characters. And the fact that Soul doesn't realize immediately that something is off, it doesn't make you put a lot of faith in that character. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I also think there's a lot of missed opportunity for fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if she is able to, like, if the characters felt more distinct from each other, I mean, they're distinct enough that one is like a little more brusque than the other, but like if you could see her like pretending to be your sister and actively trying to hide it, like, and she gives a slight little slip, then it gets kind of fun. If
Right.
we know that she has some kind of like agenda, like when we first see her on the ship, she pulls out one of her little knife things, which, we got Jedi being stabbed by lightsabers, but apparently these knives can take them down immediately.
To be fair, Osha also had knife that she was going to use on Qimir on the planet. So yeah.
Fair enough. So, but anyway, she's like sneaking through the ship with this knife, in her hand. And it's like, oh, that's fun. Like she's going to try to like, hide the knife and slip it out and hide it again when she thinks no one's looking. But it almost immediately abandons that idea and just has her interacting in dialogue scenes. And I just feel like it's a missed opportunity for like the whole, Freaky Friday or whatever Parent Trap fun of that scenario. It doesn't really lean into it all that much. And when like you said earlier, when it is discovered that she's not who she says she is, we don't really have a clear indication of why or how that occurred, which should be the entire like basis of that plot line is
Yeah.
aha,
I didn't mind that, but it's just I'm just mentioning that I don't think it was very clear.
Yeah.
Anyway, May gets strapped down to this table, and then Soul says, "I'm finally gonna tell you what actually happened," and then we don't see what it was. So, and
But
I
first
bet
I'm
you
going to
next.
fire this slow moving laser that's going to track up towards your body. Yeah.
I bet next episode it's gonna just start and he's gonna finish telling the story. It's gonna start and he's gonna be like, and that's what happened on Brendock all these years,
That would
Um,
be, I would rage throw something at my TV. I don't know how I would emotionally react to that.
All right, we have one last segment to discuss. Before we do that, though, Dan Gvozden, thanks so much for joining us. You want to let people know where they can find more of your work on the internet this week?
Sure. Yeah. Every week I'm podcasting on my own show, which is The Amazing Spider Talk, where we talk about all things Spider-Man. If you read Spider-Man comics or just follow the movies and want to learn more about the character, we go through the history of the character and review modern Spider-Man comics. It's amazingspidertalk.com. Come check it out. I've got Alan Scherstl guesting for me right now. I'm actually moving across the country, and so I know our mutual friend David Allen
Yeah,
has
Alan, who
taken
used to
over the
be
show.
film editor at Village Voice, if I recall
Correct.
correctly.
Yeah.
Very
Mhm.
talented writer and editor. Check out Dan's podcast, The Amazing Spider Talk, and really appreciate Dan joining us to cover the Acolyte here on Decoding TV. Let's talk about what's going on Coruscant, Dan. There is Vernestra is there along with the Jedi named Mog. Mog has received this transmission, and Saul says, I didn't quite hear what Saul said, but it sounded like he said the whole team is dead." Which is obviously very concerning. So Vernestra says, "We got to get out there and figure out what is going on." So Soul leaves the planet right as Vernestra arrives. There's literally ships passing in the night. On the planet, locals say the Umbra moths might have caused all the casualties. I guess they already came up with a cover story for all the Jedi dying. Um,
It was Antifa.
Yeah, well, this to me was kind of like you can imagine if the space cops arrive and they're like some other like new space cops arrive and they're like, "Hey, how did all the old space cops die?" And it's like, "Oh, I don't know, like there was a swarm of moths. No need to look around any further for people living in the woods that might be dangerous, like they know not to say anything to the 50." Anyway, so Vernestra, Mog, and other Jedi head out in search of the other Jedi that were there, and it turns out all the Jedi are dead. They're all dead. We see Jeki's lifeless body on screen, and Vernestra surveys the scene, and then there's a moment where she uses a lightsaber whip to kill an Umbra moth that's about to descend upon her. Gotta say, I'm a fan of the lightsaber whip, Dan Gvozden. This was used in the trailer, and people were like really had a lot of conversations about this. I personally think it's super cool. I do think it's weird to use it in the trailer if it's only going to be in this 1 5-second clip. So I'm assuming we'll see the lightsaber whip again. Any opinion on the lightsaber whip, Dan Gvozden?
I think it's a Pandora's box, like to undoing what a lightsaber is. You know what I mean?
Okay, tell me.
Like, I don't feel very passionately about this, but I'm going to make the case anyway
Yes,
that
make the
like
case.
once you start like bending the rules of like what the form of a lightsaber is, like you potentially open the door for it to can be completely watered down and lose its iconography altogether. You know, maybe so long as it remains like medieval weapons in the form of lasers, like I'm fine with that. But like I also know that Disney is in charge of this, and if you can sell a toy of it, they're going to go there. And so I like, you know, I like the lightsaber whip too. I think it's cool for sure. It is cool. But I worry about like what this could mean. Like, cut to this clip 10 years from now where we have like a person wearing armor made of lightsaber and so on and so forth.
I just can't wait for the lightsaber mace. You know, like that's going to be amazing. But
yeah,
you're worried that this is like when we look back, this was the first crack in the armor when lightsabers started to be used for other things, right?
yeah, I mean, like maybe they have more restraint than I've realized. Like the minute I saw a baby Yoda, I was like, "This is it. We're getting babies of everything," or like we're gonna get the full backstory of whatever creature Yoda is, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And to my knowledge, we've not gotten that yet. So like maybe they're like gonna have fun dipping their toes in and not dive into it completely. But you know, now that you said it, lightsaber mace, it's out there, and I'm already starting to imagine it, which means like it's happening, whether you like it or not. So now I get to blame you, David.
So anyway, there is a moment when Vernestra and Mog are surveying the scene and they're trying to figure out who did all this. And she says something to tip the scales, right? Like what could have done all this? Something to tip the scales. That is a reference to a line that she says in episode 4, where I don't know if you recall, Dan Gvozden, there's a scene where all the Jedi are talking, including uh, Kiadi Mundi is there, the guy with the big head, and Sol is there, and Vernestra are there, and I actually wrote down the quote. The Jedi are talking, and then Vernestra is quizzing Sol about what happened, and she's saying like, "Why didn't you tell me? You know, this poor girl survived." And Sol's like, "I saw her die." You know, which is like, I can't believe we still haven't resolved that by this point, honestly. But hopefully, next episode we'll get an answer on what's going on there. Vernestra says, "I fear May is only a small part of her master's larger plan, a plan that is difficult to see, some sort of shift, something to tip the scales." End quote. Presumably, something to tip the scales against the Jedi, right? That May is part of one component of Chimir's plan, and potentially some people have speculated Chimir's associates' plan to tip the scales against the Jedi. So that's what that's a reference to when she says something to tip the scales in this episode. What that is, TBD, as with everything else this episode. All right. Before we wrap up, Dan Gvozden, you were asking like what's going on there. I think the only thing we know for sure is the flashback episode we got in, I think, episode 3, like, was not an accurate representation of what actually happened, right? And um I'm really just waiting for Soul to lay it out. It's ridiculous that he has promised to lay it out multiple times and then just never gotten to it.
So what do you think it is? I have my theory, but I'm curious to hear yours.
That there was some kind of
Given that he's definitely going to lay it out next episode.
Give me. Like, I think I already laid it out last Decoding TV. So like,
Okay.
what is like? Basically, they were mind wiped, right? Like, either the witches or the Jedi did a mind wipe, and you know, in fact, May lays it out. She says like, the Jedi brainwashed you, Osha. That was what she speculates, and I think that's probably true. Dan Gvozden, what do you think?
I mean, I think that might be a part of it. My suspicion, and I don't know if Disney's going to let it kind of go this far, but my suspicion is there's some kind of like Jedi enforced like space genocide going on, that like they're aware of the Sith or the dark side or these force dyads, as you put it, and they are using executive force to prevent this tipping of the scales from even beginning. And that might mean using police force to travel to planets and take children and quietly dispose of the ones that they suspect are headed down that path. And so you have this Qimir who said he was disposed of, somehow they survived whatever this process is by falling down chasms that no one could survive falling down. That's kind of what I think is going on. And I think that would actually be fairly redemptive of the show, in that like that's a
Right.
bold
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
take
That'd be
to
interesting.
show the Jedi in that light. Anyway, that would be interesting, and that's kind of why I'm hanging around, because I'm like, all right, Disney, like, show some teeth, tell us something new about the Jedi that we don't know yet. Yeah.
That's a pretty cool theory, Dan Gvozden. The idea being that, like, in this case, probably they tried to kill May, right? They tried to
Correct.
exterminate May and failed, right? And
Correct.
that's what happened. So, like, May wasn't guilty of anything. She was just like chilling, doing her thing, and the Jedi tried to kill her, and now she's out for revenge, right? So,
And then they cover it up by like setting all
mind
the
wiping.
stone on fire,
Yeah, and
and
mind wiping them, right? Yeah.
yada yada yada. It never existed, and except they weren't counting on like a force dyad or something like that to kind of tip the scales. My other big lingering question is: there's a Jedi named Mog on this show. Is it a direct reference to Spaceballs? Half man, half dog. I'm my own best friend.
Right.
Making its way. Has the snake truly eaten its own tail? Here.
Yeah.
Lingering question.
Absolutely.
And I guess I'll rely on Wikipedia to fill me in the future.
Indeed. All right. Well, anyway, we'll see if Dan Gvozden's right. I mean, the thing is, every time this show has had a chance to take an interesting path, it has generally not taken that path. And so I don't have like, that's a cool theory you've outlined. I don't know. Maybe it's true. And
I just need a reason for the show to exist. Like, I felt like Obi-Wan didn't really have a reason to exist until its final episode, and that line between Anakin and Obi-Wan where Anakin says like, or Darth Vader says, I killed Anakin, not you, Obi-Wan. And it's like, okay, I could see why you greenlit it on that line, So like, I'm like, okay, like I don't yet know why this show was something that had to be made. And I'm hoping it's some bold reason that they're holding off on repeatedly every episode.
All right. Well, the other thing to consider, though, Dan, here's why I think your theory is not true, is that it's very clear from this episode that Sol was acting in a rogue fashion, right? Like, he keeps saying like, oh, it's finally time for me to tell the High Order what I did, as though like if the Jedi were like out there exterminating Force dyads, willy nilly, like then Sol wouldn't need to confess anything.
Well, I mean, it could still be like a SEAL Team 6 of Jedi. You know what I mean?
There's just no way. Like, there's no way. It's maybe Sol be going rogue and doing that on his own, but like that the idea that it's like an institutional initiative, I don't know. I mean,
well, I don't know enough to say one way or the other. I just think there's something along those lines. I was right. Those long-term listeners who've listened to our coverage of Loki back in the day, I did, like call the Kang of it all. So like, I'm hoping that I'm rolling, the right dice here. I've got, or in your parlance, to have the right hand of cards,
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dan Gvozden, for joining us on Decoding TV to chat about The Acolyte. We'll be back next week with a conversation about The Acolyte, episode 7. And Dan Gvozden will join us again in a couple weeks for our conversation about the finale. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.